All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. It's Antiwar Radio. I'm Scott Horton, and I'm talking with Tom Woods. His website is tomwoods.com. He's the author and or editor of Rollback, Nullification, Meltdown, We Who Dared Say No to War, How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization, 33 Questions You're Not Supposed to Ask About American History. I'll actually strike that and reverse it around. About American history you're not supposed to ask. The Politically Incorrect Guide to American History and Who Killed the Constitution. He writes at LouRockwell.com, at Mises.org, and again, yes, at TomWoods.com. And actually, Tom, now that we're safe this side of the break, let me ask you a little bit about the Civil War. It's the sesquicentennial of, I guess, the South's attempt to invade and conquer the North. And then Abraham Lincoln's heroic defense of the Republic from their aggression. So I was wondering, if maybe you could, touch a little bit on maybe some of the politically incorrect questions about the Civil War as it's known, and maybe even the importance of why people ought to get their heads straight about who really did what and why.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a lot of, apologetics and myth-making on both sides of this, frankly. But I think people who are inclined to accept the seventh grade textbook version, but yet who are also very anti-war and anti-American empire should realize that, of course, the neocons constantly make reference to the Civil War. They view this as the example par excellence of the righteousness of the federal government stomping out its enemies. And I mean, that's exactly how they view the whole world, the righteous federal government stomping out. It's the angels versus devils view. If you're inclined to believe that, I think it needs to be revisited. Now, it's true that I don't think it's helpful to argue that that the Southern Secession didn't have anything to do with slavery. I don't. You can see in their own documents they acknowledge a link between secession and slavery. The issue is, what about the war and slavery? That's an entirely separate question. It's entirely separate whether the war itself was fought over slavery, and the answer here is that, well, at least the first 18 months, Lincoln couldn't have been clearer about this. I mean, I want to save the Union. And I've said that again and again, and if I could save it without freeing any of the slaves, I would absolutely do that. And he was willing to support an amendment to the Constitution that would have forever forbidden anyone from ever establishing any anti-slavery law or amending the Constitution in the future to abolish slavery. If that's what it took to keep the Union together, then that's what he's willing to do. Now, again, there's no need to go to extremes. I take him at his word that I see no reason not to take him at his word that he was morally opposed to slavery, but he obviously had priorities that were greater than that. And so what eventually happened was that you had 1.5 million people dead, wounded, or missing, basically on behalf of a political abstraction, namely the Union.
Well, and, funny enough, by the time the thing was over, there was no Union. It was the nation.
Right, exactly.
It was the United States is going to do this and that instead of our anymore.
Exactly, and so it's not a surprise that, people predicted that now that we've got this giant consolidated union and we have smacked down the states, it was pretty, Robert E. Lee said, look, I guarantee you this is going to become an imperial power now. Guaranteed. That's exactly, now, of course, we're not supposed to like Robert E. Lee because he was in the South and whatever. We all have to act like fifth graders. But, how prophetic could a guy be? And Richard Weaver said the same thing. Was a great conservative in the 20th century. He said, it's no surprise that, within a generation or two after the consolidation of the empire at home, we start to see movement toward empire abroad and kicking around our weaker neighbors to the south.
Well, yeah, first thing they did was combine the northern and southern armies together and send them west to finish killing off all the Indians.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, there's your righteous federal government marching on. And so it goes to show that, you get this giant consolidated union. I was just reading, I don't know, because everybody's weighing in on this subject. I don't know, it might have been something in Newsweek. My own fault for reading a source like that. But the guy was saying, well, gosh, let's think of what would have happened if things had turned out differently. And one of them was, my gosh, if we had more than one political unit in what is now the United States, well, gee, maybe we might not have entered World War I, and think what a disaster that would have been. Like, would both Americas, or with 3 or whatever units we would have been, would they all have entered World War I? What a disaster if we hadn't. Are you kidding me? Maybe the world might have been a lot different in a better way if the U.S. hadn't entered World War I.
Hey, if the U.S. hadn't entered World War I, no Soviet Union, no Nazi Germany, no French and British domination of the Middle East, then no Cold War, none of this madness.
Right,
now,
exactly.
maybe other bad things would have happened, but nothing as bad as what Woodrow Wilson did.
Yeah, what you are proposing is an entirely reasonable and defensible contrary to fact scenario that could very well have happened. But we are all trained to believe that history had to turn out the way it did, and the way it turned out is always the best possible way it could have turned out. Because for some reason we've just been taught to always give the national government the moral benefit of the doubt. Everything it did was always the best possible thing. Whatever. And so I mean, if we could just have enough imagination, if we could stop being so brainwashed, about just always constantly giving our allegiance to this centralized government and then thinking that that's the only way to live, if we could just think independently for 5 seconds that maybe the alternate universe that might have existed might have been an improvement.